Welcome to the Disassembled podcast, a monthly conversation between me, Travis Razor, and John Schwartz, the Data Sherlock, disassembling the media, history, and our current culture. Let's join our heroes now.
So I saw that movie. They were really hyping Harry Potter and the it's not Harry Potter, magical beasts and other mystical things.
Is that the movie?
Fantastic Beasts and
right, like the book that they did.
Yeah, that was the
I remember thinking at the time when that book came out, like, wow, this is such a waste of money, because it was kind of expensive. It's really short, and it was just kind of like scattered maybe notes and stuff that I guess were publishable.
Yeah, the movie looks like a full narrative. It looks like they took whatever that was and said, all right, we're going to make a plot about, like, monsters are breaking into London. It's kind of Godzilla-y, you know?
Right.
And then there's, like, Eddie Redmayne is the wizard who comes and shows he's a good guy and wizardry's cool. It's very, like, crossover world. Instead of Harry Potter where... Well, I don't know. I don't know Harry Potter too extensively. I think most of it takes place more in the wizardry half of it. Not all of it, but...
Right. It's definitely a lot more in the wizarding world than in the real world. Of course, there's always parts, but I got two questions that come out of that. One, why does everyone want to cast Eddie Redmayne in their movie, even though he's objectively terrible, has ruined all of these movies, and has, like, no talent whatsoever? And then two, why are people so into Harry Potter? What is causing the resurgence?
All right. Number one, there was a lot of positive reviews and actually fan reaction to him playing Stephen Hawking. The movie was... I didn't see it, so I won't admit to having an impression of it, but I don't know. I mean, if that's the movie... That one it was Academy Award nominated, I believe. It fit into the biopic are really hot movie genre, right? And, he's a disabled mathematician. It's kind of like Beautiful Mind times 2.
He was like just as much of a scumbag as the Beautiful Mind guy.
Yes, exactly. And still Hollywood movie. They love it. It's a mathematician. I don't know. He's still alive too. Stephen Hawking's still alive, still saying stuff through his machines, and I don't know.
Yep.
Beyond that, what
still
else?
Still cheating on his wives.
The Danish Girl. Eddie Redmayne was in The Danish Girl. The Danish Girl, again, I did not see. Was hyped. I think was mostly a bust though. Right?
Well, he can't physically act. He's like a statue. He's a grotesque statue.
Wow, that's I guess so. I mean, what are your thoughts on why he's popular? I know you're in complete disbelief about his fame and rise to stardom.
I have no thoughts whatsoever because I seriously cannot think of a positive thing that he's done. And I don't see versus other people that are available, I don't see why you'd cast him. I get, okay, maybe he's done some movies that were popular. I get that. But even out of those movies, like, he was likely not the good one. And I don't see him as having that much star appeal. Certainly in the United States, he does not fit the usual profile. And I kind of get that, like, it's a good time to feature someone who doesn't look normal. It's a British movie, so we're gonna get some weird looking people. But man, even out of the weird looking people, they certainly pulled the card.
Well, he I'd say to parallel that in the U.S., we do have Owen Wilson in terms of the fucked up nose and I don't know, right?
Owen Wilson, I agree, is also another terrible actor, but he doesn't ruin movies, and he can actually act.
All right.
He's not well.
I will say that Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, it is budgeted at $225 million. So this is a heavy hitter.
You think they could have afforded someone with some actual, like, acting ability or someone who looked good? One of the two.
Oh, he was also, I believe, the brother in Jupiter Ascending, which I've watched and wish I had not.
No, he was like the emperor dude or whatever, wasn't he?
They were three siblings, the fighting for control of the universe. The
yeah, exactly.
He's the old man one. I remember
Right.
him. That movie. Wow. And he was also in The Theory of Everything, but to add to his popular movies in the past 10 years, The Theory of Everything, yes. Les Miserables,
Terrible.
My Week with Maryland, The Other
He was
Boleyn
really bad
Girl,
in that.
The
That
Other
was
Boleyn
awful.
Girl, Elizabeth the Golden Age,
That was super bad.
Savage Grace,
Didn't see
And-
that.
maybe that's all the ones that are well known. Thomas and Friends, Sauter's Legend of the Lost Treasure. That must be a kid's movie. Yes. And he already has a movie slated for 2018.
Yeah, I don't get it. He seems to be very popular.
Very popular, but most of those movies I thought were disappointments. My Week with Maryland? I don't know.
I liked
How did
that movie, but he was not good in it.
Well, maybe it wasn't supposed to be good, right?
Well, he was a little more suited for that because it's kind of supposed to be this dopey, ugly dude. And
Is he the love interest in that, or is he the like narrator guy? What is he in that movie?
Aren't they the same?
Are they? I can't.
Yeah.
I think you may have showed me that movie, and I don't really remember it that well. I'll be honest. Is he a reporter in it? Filmmaker. He's a filmmaker. Okay. Yeah. I would say mostly he's definitely very female audience oriented. These films are targeted towards women. The Yellow Handkerchief.
Right.
These are all romance. Romance, history, romance, history, history, romance, history, romance. I don't know what the Stephen Hawking movie is really about, but the cover picture they have is him and his wife. So, and it is actually called a British biographical romantic drama. So, right there.
There we go.
The answer is women must like him.
Non-threatening.
Perhaps. Good theory. He did play the Danish girl, which reinforces that, right? He's somehow, I guess, feminine enough for someone to be fooled in the 1920s when everyone was androgynous.
He is pretty androgynous.
Mm-hmm. Androgyny is very, very popular. Now, the second question was Harry Potter. Why does it have both either sustaining popularity and, I would actually argue, potentially growing popularity or resurgent popularity?
Yeah, I think there's been very much so a resurgence. It's always been popular, but at least it seems right now it's much more popular to display your preference for it.
Well, I've been a Harry Potter hater my whole life. I will say that I've always hated it. I've always thought it was overrated, overhyped. It's not that it's terrible. It's not a failure as a book or an idea or a story. I just always thought it was like, okay, I couldn't get into it. And that's what it comes down to. I think my kind grew for a while because it was popular to hate something that was from your childhood, right? It's like, oh, that's lame. Ugh, Harry Potter, lame. Ha ha ha, Harry Potter. And now I think people are past lying about their interests and people are honest again. And people like Harry Potter. That's the truth. I'm not going to explain why they like Harry Potter, but I think it was that when you're 21, no one likes lame kid stuff. And now people are kids and now people are like, well, fuck it. Why am I lying to people about what I care about? And they can accept that they like a story about a wizard.
Yeah, I guess I can accept that. Definitely, though, I still think that there's got to be some sort of cycle that's happening where I get maybe that's what the trigger was, right? So it's more people kind of coming out about Harry Potter, which then kind of causes more people to get involved because, you know, one duck does it and the others start getting in line. And I totally get that. But I think we're now at the peak of this cycle where you've got a lot of people and a lot of excitement going on right now. I don't think that even when I was a kid, I remember Harry Potter being this popular in what I would call an off year, because there were on years and off years when the books were coming out, right? When the book came out, that year was super hot. And the next year would be kind of hot, but it would get progressively colder until maybe a year or two before the next book came out, and then it would start to build up again. Whereas now it seems like we have gone through this big build-up, that there's no book coming out, there's no real movie coming out. They had the play in London, but it's not like the majority of fans actually could or did go see that. So, you know, what's causing this build-up?
Let me say this. You remember the movies and how big they were, too. They started coming out roughly high school era in the mid 2000s. Those movies that continued the cycle.
Right.
I remember the books. Every year I got books given to me as presents even, right? Like that's how big it was. It was the most popular kids cultural thing. Then it really became the equivalent to Star Wars. Not the same segment of population. It was a different segment, but scale, it's like Star Wars.
Right.
It was or Pokemon. These three things happen kind of in sequence. You have like, well, they all happen pretty close to each other too. Pokemon as a game comes out in 97. Harry Potter the book comes out in 97. Phantom Menace is 299. All of these were kind of the preeminent late 90s genres almost,
right.
Or not brands. We'll call them kids brands. And each of them tried to do it. And Harry Potter was kind of the winner in a way because they made 8 movies. And now they're on to the 9th movie. That is more than Star Wars has even done. So, and then let me back it up and say, they made a theme park. There's no Star Wars lands. So whoever owns Harry Potter, if it's the studio or if it's JK, I don't actually know. But I actually have a tendency to believe it's actually the studio owns some of the intellectual property. Because it's Universal Studios' Harry Potter world.
Right. Which is another thing, too, that theme park seems to be one of the most popular theme parks, at least by hype.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't also understand what do you do at a Harry Potter theme park?
Well, they're roller coasters, but they're Harry Potter themed, so they're more exciting.
Maybe I've just lost my capacity for imagination, but, even the movies were quite a while ago now. What I'd say is that's true. Definitely interest was sustained, and now you have because of that, a huge base that could say that they were there for some sort of original event, we'll call it, right? Either they remember the books coming out and reading them, or they remember the movie coming out and watching it, because that would have been the next 10 years. And so now we've got this huge fan base, and we're starting to exploit it. So I think that's part of it, but also maybe you're suggesting there's some sort of 20-year cycle, and that this sort of nostalgia wave, as I would call it, this is just part of that, because not only is it video games like Pokemon Go, and all these kind of things which are updated to a more adult-like reality, right? Like the new Pokemon game, you hardly do anything. It's just whatever you're doing in your spare time. There was the reboots, as we talked about in our last episode. But in music too, I definitely see it, right? Like there was the whole Vaporwave thing, Simpsons wave, all about all this juvenile kind of nostalgia.
Well, let me hit on a parallel thing that I see with Harry Potter. I also see with Game of Thrones. The TV show drives people to go back to the original source and read the book or listen to an audiobook. So the movies were the Pokemon Go of Harry Potter, where it's like anyone can watch a 2-hour movie and everyone loves movies. Okay, fine. But it's more Lord of the Rings than it is normal movie. So you have, I look at it like this, those movies expanded the fan base and to grandparents and parents who maybe had been reluctant to read a kid's book. Because I know there's a lot of intergenerational Harry Potter fans. There's a lot of like families. We all like Harry Potter, and there's not a lot of books that are multi-generational anymore. I'll say another one, weirdly, is 50 Shades of Grey. There's a lot of moms and daughters who both read 50 Shades of Grey, something you pass up or pass down in generation. Now, that movie dropped the ball. That is the other side of this kind of brand building. If your movie drops the ball, you have no chance. I also think J.K. Rowling, her other books, I know you might be a fan of some of her books she didn't write with her name. Those were not very popular. I think she's shifting her energies back to Harry Potter.
Well, let me offer an alternative theory as well, that it actually has more to do with the Trump movement than it does with any of those things. Because what Harry Potter really represents to me, Harry Potter itself is a stitched together story of past peak stories, we'll call it. Every great fantasy work is in Harry Potter. So reading Harry Potter is reading every great fantasy. And it's all in easy mode. Unlike reading Lord of the Rings or something, which is written in a way that is very difficult to read, very, very epic, and so hard to understand. Not a lot happens page to page, and the situation is just harder to grasp at this point. It's definitely not as spoon-fed. But then also Harry Potter itself very much represents this kind of old world English boarding school heteronormative kind of lifestyle and story where Harry Potter is the man, and he goes along growing from a boy into a man through these trials, doing this traditional male-centric hero kind of story. He's always saving the girls. There are ethnic people, but they're normally in positions of power that Harry are in lesser power. And so Harry can show that he is so magnanimous to lesser people by helping them out. It's very, very rare that Harry actually receives any help from someone who's not white, wealthy, and English. And so I think that it goes back to, why do people like Trump? It's this whole, I think there are indeed people who like him because he represents this worldview, which is now quickly disappearing from popular culture. Harry Potter is actually, and I say this, I got to this because I know a lot of people who are seriously in relationships because of Harry Potter. That was the first thing they talked about. That was how they bonded, and that's what they still do. They still go to Harry Potter stuff. They still talk about the books. They still read the movies. It's a part of their romantic life. And I look at what Harry Potter represents. I think about the really kind of kids book romances that they had in that, and I think about just how the entire story is structured. And it's the most anti-feminist, heteropositive, go white people, save the day rich people in boarding school story that you could possibly come up with. And I think it has a lot more to do with that. It has a lot more to do with people in our culture being completely confused and unable to figure out what they want, then bonding over this shared omnis story, which represents every single hero story ever told, and then, running with that as an actual way to model their lives. Harry Potter is much more like the Bible than Lord of the Rings.
Very interesting, framing it as a British boy private school growing up experience. That reminds me of all those other stories that had that exact same element. I mean,
it's a definite trope.
But I also think, what if it's kind of to all these people who live with their parents, don't like living with their parents, and fantasize out about a different reality? How cool is it to dream of being, I'm away at a boarding school? I also think there's some of that is most people don't like the way they grow up for whatever reason, out of their control. That's the fantasy.
Right. They wish their parents were dead and that they lived with their horrible aunt and uncle and went to magic school.
Yes, magic school is the escape. Very, very much relate to me. Here's the escape. But as you point out, it is Harry Potter, male, goes to a private school, pretty much the elites make the decisions, and Harry gets help from other mostly white people. Is this now I would argue, you think that Trump people who like Harry Potter, that's a pretty big overlap, or is this just similar phenomenon draws people together?
Yeah, I think it's the exact kind of same motivation. It's different people. It doesn't have to overlap, but it's this fact that in our world there was that system for a long time, right? That and let's reframe it. If you think about it 200 years ago, then forget magic school. These people are going to school at all, meaning this is a super elite privileged class of people. And so that carries forward to today, but instead of regular school like the rest of us commoners get, they get to go to magic school, which only 10% of people get to go to, and you just have to be born that way. And some people come from disadvantaged muggle households, right? But they still break into the system, but rarely. So it projects that whole world forward, and I think that that was something that happened for a long time, and the way that the world is going to work next, it may not work that way. There's a lot of people that react to that differently. Some people react to that by becoming what I would call the dark side of Trump fans. I think there's a dark side to every political movement, and those people are on the dark side, where to them he really does represent. And there's Hillary supporters too that I think have the same view. I'm just picking on Trump today. They see this, both of these candidates, they represent some sort of ordered system that was from the past, and they're projecting for this worldview that Harry Potter represents. And, you don't have to actually be into those. The way that you can express that desire for that old worldview maybe is in your Harry Potter fandom, or it is in your Trump fandom, or it is in your love of J.J. Abrams reboots.
Now, I just watched the not the interview, the one of the most highly rated monologue moments from Glengarry Glen Ross, where Alec Baldwin does his always be closing pitch.
Right.
And to me, Donald Trump is that character. Not just that character, but that character exemplifies the type of super asshole, super aggressive, get it done, even if it's illegal or bad. He is that version of it. And I think Hillary is, in many ways, the really mean, get it done, strong woman. And some people do want that. In both cases, they want an abrasive person who'll say it like it is and then, make you mad and turn your anger into productivity versus, I think Hillary, it's like, who can dare stop me? She's the super aggressive, in control manipulator. They're both manipulators. They both manipulate humans, right? I mean, this is objectively what's happening is they manipulate people to further manipulate others. Maybe manipulation is the wrong word, but influence, manipulate, convince.
Yeah, I think the past as we see it is that type of hyper aggression where it's not just being aggressive, it's actually doing anything, right? Saying anything, being anything, breaking any law, whatever. We see that. You see that in both candidates. And, just to go back to the gender analysis, they're both acting hyper-masculine all the time. I mean, Hillary is from that, I think, like 70s, 80s, women are just entering the workplace worldview where, to gain acceptance and survival, you have to be really masculine and hit hard. Even though I don't know if that's strictly true. I'm not a woman, but I know that I've never seen Hillary in a way that even made her seem feminine. And it's to the point that when she had the grandmother comments, which I noticed have all stopped, it was just almost kind of unbelievable because she doesn't act like a grandmother. She acts much more like a grandfather.
Interesting. And I'll go back to the 2008 election when Obama said during one of the debates to Hillary, "You're likable enough," right? She's not the kind of friendly person you want to grab a beer with. She doesn't exude that. She exudes much more dominance via, look at the debates. She did not weave a picture of what she wants for America. She weaves a picture of why Donald Trump is bad. Trump weaves a picture of why Hillary is bad. That's their style, is take down the other person. When everyone is dead, I will be in charge.
Right. It's very aggressive. Very aggressive. It's that 80s murders and acquisitions type strategy projected into today. It's definitely not Reaganism. It's people that were in their heyday when Reagan was in power. It's like this weird 20-year cycle echo now. And it's all related, I think.
Well, and the real future lies on when these people become president. Either one of them probably will be president. How will they apply the 80s to today? Will we have privatization from Trump? Will he start selling off assets, destroying parts of the federal government to optimize, to extract value now? As you've said in the past, he's a corporate raider. That's his, potential style. Will there be mergers and acquisitions within the government? How will they expand and sell off things? I assume it could be Thatcher-esque with privatization.
Well, there's a ton of valuable real estate owned by the federal government.
National parks, buildings, tons and tons of buildings.
Basically the entire western United States, but even beyond that, there certainly are a lot of land disputes out there. Like the last year, the standoff in Oregon definitely shows that. There's a lot of disputes. They're always having them in Nevada, down by Henderson. But I think, Washington, D.C., that is super expensive land now, and the federal government owns a ton of it. It's time to start selling those off, make some money, New York City is the exact same way, where there's a lot of federally owned land in New York City that could be reappropriated to better contracts.
And then we have Hillary. I assume Hillary, to me, follows the patronage model. The foundation was a model for sustaining patronage and having influence. Whatever government she has will definitely be one focused on growing the pyramid so her influence is greater. That's how I look at it. More favors, more allies, more soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, it gets her two things. It gets her the ability to control the court system, which is one, through pardons and various, instructing the Justice Department not to prosecute people. And then, two, it does gain her the ability then, as a former president, to be pretty much immune from all scrutiny and get away with anything. Build My Brother's Keeper 2, whatever the new Clinton Global Initiative is going to be. But I mean, do you think she's going to live? I mean, just honestly, she is 70 years old. She has Parkinson's. Is she going to live through 2 terms? 78?
I mean, I'll say this. I think the Supreme Court always proves that people live way longer than you expect. No, it's not
as president, though. I mean, there's a lot of notable presidents that have turned to jelly in the presidency and had either the VP or their spouse take over, like Wilson,
Yes.
FDR, Truman.
Yes. And look, and those are all 20th century examples. I agree. But I am going to argue that facade Clinton will never die. She will never die until it's the moment. They will keep her alive as much as possible. Look, I don't know if she is kind of a Cardinal Richelieu where she's being run by someone else, or there is a Cardinal Richelieu. I don't know if there's someone who's pulling her strings and she really is behest to someone else, but she's become so valuable. She's an entire industry. If she does win 2 elections, she will survive them both, I believe. Now, last term, she might die in office, but I think she'll make it through another election cycle.
All right. I think it's a good thing to think about at this point, because if you consider that all the presidents seem to use the presidency as a way to further their post-presidential careers, which makes sense, we all do that in our careers, then it makes a lot more sense to me the motivations of someone like Obama, who runs younger and then has more time afterwards to exploit it. It's pretty obvious now. We see what he's trying to do. He's trying to set up his own super scam foundation, and he has a good, 30 years maybe to run it? 20? Depends on how much life the presidency takes out of you. Why is someone who's already 70 years old, already a super millionaire, running for president? Does she really think she's going to have a post-presidential career? Because it seems like she's barely going to survive into the presidency, health-wise.
She's not one who would believe that, though. She does not believe in her own mortality. To her, she can defy it all. She's gotten this far. She's going to beat death a little bit more.
I'd say that's once again that very hyper-aggressive, masculine type personality.
Yes, I would say Trump believes the exact same thing. He believes he'll live as long as he damn wants. Nothing will get in the way of them.
I feel like Trump, though, he already is post-career.
This is his retirement.
He retired effectively like in the 90s and then became kind of a celebrity instead. And he did endorsement deals, and he put his name on other people's property a lot more than doing it himself. And his kids run the business. He just does publicity and stuff. And it's almost like he started doing this because he's been talking about it for a long time, and it would be funny. And I definitely kind of believe more the South Park view, where that's how he got into it. But I don't believe that that's why he's here and he wants to get out. I think now he really does want to be the president, but I don't know if there's really a post-presidential plan for him. I don't even think there's really much of a presidential plan.
And I would have to agree with that. I think it's kind of, he knew it was possible, so he thought, hey, why not give it a shot? Because
if you had the access, if you had the ability, and you had a counterpart or a likely counterpart that you thought would be easy to take, even, with you being a political outsider and everyone hating you, which is true, and it has been. I mean, it's probably never been easier for an outsider to walk in and do this in the history of America. I just don't know what's going on there with that campaign. I'm sure that there is going to be some raiding, if you will, because that's the pattern. That's what they're already doing. But I think at the same time, they're going to expand it. They're just going to shuffle it around, right? It's going to be used as justification. They're going to say, look, so like the J. Edgar Hoover building. I was just reading about that this week. It's only 40 years old, but it's already a complete piece of crap and it's fallen apart. and it's like unsuitable for their needs now because the roof leaks and it doesn't meet the building code anymore. It never actually did. And there's all these problems with it. So they want to tear it down and rebuild it. But it's not even done being paid off yet. All these different factors are involved. And so instead, what they're talking about is, well, we should just build a new FBI headquarters somewhere. And
in
then,
Virginia.
right. And then where it's cheaper. And then, my guess is, oh, we're going to do this with a lot of agencies. Let's tear down these old crappy buildings in Washington, D.C. Let's rebuild them with luxury condos and malls. And then let's just put the whole federal government kind of out in the suburbs. It would make sense because all this land, it's difficult for them to justify keeping it. Congress can always just say, oh, it's our land again at any point. So it's not like they lose anything long term. And they can make some money, which they can take 10% of and fund, their own further activities.
I can see that. I can see it as a way of creating more liquidity within the government for special programs, whatever you want to call it, new buildings,
Right.
new interests, new investments, or even new wars.
Well, he wants to do a lot of stuff, right? At least that's what he says, but he doesn't want to increase taxes. And so there's only a few ways to raise revenue. You can borrow money, but it seems like nobody else in the world anymore has any money. Everybody's broke, and so that's probably not a great plan right now. You can tax more, and he says he's not going to do that. So the only thing left is to have a yard sale and sell off the worthless federal buildings to clean up the house, and then put that money into whatever he's going to do with it. Border Patrol.
I also would like to say, never ever have I believed any time anyone says they are not raising taxes.
Well, it's not feasible to promise that.
Well, yes, fine. But regardless of that feasibility, people say it all the time. Republicans say it all the time. And then, not maybe in the last 1 or 2 years, but historically, Republicans raise taxes.
Well, Bush Sr. proved that you can run a campaign on that and then, renege on that and not have it be that big a deal.
No. Bush Sr. would have won without Perot. I'm fairly sure, right? I mean, can we agree with that? Agree to that?
I don't know. That's hard to say. That is the propaganda line that Nader cost Gore the election and that Perot cost Bush the election. But I don't know.
I think Nader is less of an effect just based on percentages and the key states.
I think the reason that Bush lost the election is because the Berlin Wall fell. And several years later, that had trickled into the consciousness enough that they wanted someone like Bill Clinton and not someone like George Bush.
I can agree with that. I agree there is a shift between old guard versus new guard, exciting versus kind of more boring, out of touch.
And to go to
the illusion of being in touch, not even reality, the illusion of it.
I mean, there was the popular appeal, sure, but look at what Bush Sr. really represented. He represented this 1970s, I think, view of the world, and he wanted to slow things down, maintain stability and order, and not raise taxes, and not build the government, not do all these things, where it almost seemed like he still believed, I think this was the perception, he believed that they were still in the Cold War. And, maybe he was right in some ways and wrong in others. It doesn't really matter. But, Clinton came out and he says, hey, we are not in the Cold War anymore. And he was quickly convinced to deregulate and to really, cause the 90s economic miracle / asset bubble. And it fed into this public desire to celebrate the victory in the Cold War, you might say, to expand, to not worry about defense as much anymore, and instead worry about picking on other people and, really start the predatory cycle again.
Well, and now we've gone into the re-regulations. So to some extent, right? Would you say we're in a period of more regulations, more control?
Well, it's like the 1970s again, I guess, here. We've had this big slowdown, and the price of oil is messing around a lot, and there's a lot of kind of alternative energy sector disruption, and that actually is a big gear. And, the Russians, there's a lot of tension, real or not. And, it's not
proxy wars abound.
Yeah, exactly, and it's really not looking that good in the future. I mean, you can be optimistic about it and say, oh, well, long term everything goes up, but right now it's everything's pretty crazy. And I think that these people that are going to come in, they really are the raiders, because that's what you have to do. I mean, there's going to be bad times, and so you want these people in charge, right? You want Trump in charge because you know that he's going to sell the government and pay for it. You want Hillary in charge because you know that she's going to find alternative ways to raise funds, right? Like, why not just... they actually, I think, both want the same thing in one regard, at least, where, Trump says we should pull out of NATO or something, right? That's what everyone says. I don't think that's really what he means. I think what he means, because he says they need to start paying for it, I think he means that they need to start paying us for policing services. And I think that Hillary is going to do the exact same thing, but going to be different. It's going to be, oh, well, why don't you pay us all this money, and then we'll go and build a military base in your area, which is something we've done forever. And so she will find alternative ways to raise money in the same way that he will.
Yeah. It's
he's just more direct about it. He's the bombastic, oh, we're going to pull right out unless you give us money. She's going to go to them one by one.
Yes, Trump is the public negotiator. He's going to do it now, put it on the table so it's thought about for months and months.
Right.
And Hillary will have one-on-one meetings where she threatens them in person. We can pull out.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you want to help fund the continued defense of Western Europe. And they'll think about it, and then they'll remember they don't have as developed a military. They don't have the nukes that are based in Germany and the Netherlands and Belgium.
Well, let me just fry up some super hot conspiracy bacon here. And let me just say, let's put that for the side. I mean, there's another conversation we could have where I don't believe that those nukes actually work and that they're real. I think that we sold them equipment that doesn't work. Because why would you ever sell anyone a nuclear weapon? But that's another conversation. What I really think is that we have created, we have definitely allowed and encouraged this situation to happen in Europe, where now they have social problems that might need to be in the future. Let's just say if things in Central Europe go more extreme and this migrant crisis goes more extreme, then here in the United States, if things like that were happening, we would call in the National Guard. And if the National Guard couldn't handle it, we would call in the Army. And so in Europe, they've already begun calling in the National Guards with all these big camp disturbances that have been going on recently, right? I think that in Europe, it's going to be very difficult to call in the real army, because the real army is partially staffed by people that used to be migrants and by immigrants. And so I think it's going to be difficult to get the army to actually go in and put down these uprisings. And it's going to be on both sides, right? It's not just the migrants who are going to start with the uprisings. And so who is going to be the perfect people already there with super advanced weaponry and military bases all over the country to go in and on the sly put down these revolts? Something that we've become quite good at over the last 10 years.
Well, it could be us, but I'd counter argue that why won't it be a private military corporation? Why won't it be third parties
That's what we are now. I mean, sure, on paper, it may not be. It's going to be exactly like Libya. That's my real bacon here, is that we were already there. There were already all these CIA campaigns going on. You know, the decision of when to pull the trigger on Gaddafi was one I don't think anyone actually made, because it was on a timeline that was set by all these different projects, and so it happened when all the projects came together. And I think that this is a long-term project in Europe where we obviously are over there influencing them one way or the other, trying to destroy their banks, trying to destroy all their countries. I'm sure we're also there trying to destroy their social order so that then we can step in again, as we did in the last century, and, quote, solve the problem.
Let me go back to the Cold War for a moment and mention Project Gladio, which was the stay-back U.S. military and intelligence operation throughout NATO countries. Notably, Italy was the most prominent with the Red Brigade, was the kind of communist response, and our forces also planted bombs, conducted terrorism, counter-spy operations, huge munition dumps, arms throughout Italy, went to both sides, created a lot of chaos and instability.
Right. So I think that's it, and that's why we're beating the drum at Russia too, right? It says, look, you're already weak. You already have these things going on inside of your country, which means you may need to deploy your armed forces against your own people, which means you don't actually have full support anymore, which means you are now more of a target for the Russians to roll right in. And so that's why we're beating the drum. It has nothing to do with America. It has to do with Europe and saying, look, you're already weak. If we step out, not only will your country fall, but the moment that it does, the Russians roll in. And so you want us there. You want us there to help you put down these people because you need to keep your army strong and focused on Russia, on external threats. And that's why you need to hire our private military contractors, which actually work for us. And you need to hire our actual military. And you need to buy more weapons because without us, you will fall. Every regime is a banana republic. That's our view. And it is exactly that same system. That's why I say, I don't know if George Bush Sr. was really that wrong. I don't think the Cold War is really over. It's just the big player got knocked out. It's still going on all the time. Nothing ever changed.
We just need to have the other part, the person to foil stuff off of, there to be threats from both sides or a threat from any side, so to speak.
The fault of Cold War thinking today is this idea that the Cold War only had two sides. Because it didn't just have two sides.
So
it had 180 sides.
Well, back then it might have only been 70, but point taken. It's much more about everyone has their own interests first. We as nations play our interests, play the insecurities of those interests against one another.
Right. We were. It's not like if you were in NATO, you were on the good guys team. We were still manipulating and those countries just as much as the ones that were our battleground states.
Oh yeah, I will say, let's look at European countries that have taken the U.S. investment. Poland, we have some kind of missile system in Poland. We're trying to expand. We've been doing that for years, and the way that works so beautifully is we have American troops in Poland. If Russia went to war with Poland and Americans died, we'd be there, like that. And that's really one of the American advantages is you have Americans based somewhere, North Korea versus South Korea. We have 30,000 troops there. There will not be a war there unless we are involved. And that's part of the calculation is by putting American troops there, it makes the risk that much greater. Japan, same deal. Germany, same deal. Now, I don't know. It's like who really pays the most in that equation? We're paying for the soldiers. That costs billions and billions a year. So whatever payoffs we're getting have to be tens of billions to be worthwhile.
Well, we strong arm others into doing things that we know will disrupt their country. For instance, we are very, very big on this idea of we're having a war, you should send in people. And we never really cared that much, right? The Japanese people sent, a couple hundred to Iraq. Some sent more. Don't forget about Poland. Didn't really matter. We just needed to make sure that they were on board. And now I realize in this migrant crisis with Syria, you want to get all these people on board because it will piss off the people back home. And that's the only reason that you really want them there. If you think about it, it doesn't really piss off the American people that much. We already have this infinite amount of tolerance, it seems. There's not that many Syrians here, so it's not that big of a political threat. And I think, we're just so full of it anyway that at this point, they're out of control. So they lose nothing by doing it. And they create all of this instability that occurs because of that. And then they ask them, not only have we caused this huge problem for you, but now we need you to come in and help us solve it, which then makes the people in their own country very upset. So then they can't really do it, but they're in this bind. We've just continually put more and more pressure, more and more screws on them. Everything we've done has been to engineer the situation.
Do not give us all the credit. French and British bombers bombed in Libya and bombed in Syria. Supplies have been sold from the UK and France to the UAE, to Saudi Arabia, to Egypt, to every player in the Middle East is getting weapons from the West. This has been a mutually beneficial conflict.
Well, once again, though, that's been the cycle that's been going on since the Middle East began at the end of the Ottoman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the big suppliers. We've got Russia, China, Britain, France, Israel,
and occasionally Italy and Germany. These are the people who make the weapons for sale. And let me say that Hollande, a socialist, has been the most aggressive French president since the 1960s, I would argue, since de Gaulle.
Well,
He
they're all
is.
in, though. They're all in.
Oh, I
Not
understand they're
just
all in.
him.
I understand they're all in, but this is a change in France. France is becoming more. Whatever's going to happen, they're either going with very offensive socialists or they're going with very offensive right wingers. They have gone almost neoconservative, so to speak. I think they used to be more of a holdout, and now they are trying to play all sides. They were trying to make Russian vessels while also sanctioning Russia, right? How crazy was that? They eventually had to pull out of the deal because it created too much dissidence. How does it make sense that you're going to make Russia brand new top of the line weapons, yet you're also saying what they're doing is inappropriate?
Long-term contracts, it's difficult to do business on that scale and respond to the political cycle, which is daily.
True. Daily versus decades. So I'm just going to make the argument that, yeah, we'll be hired to do stuff, but I don't know if it's going to be formally the U.S. military.
Well, no, let me speak exactly to your point, though. Exactly. What is the one thing that we could do to ensure that peace will last an arbitrary number of years, 10 years? I can guarantee that we can guarantee, it may not be true, maybe we can't actually do it, but we will, and we can guarantee that for 10 years that there will be no war in Europe. And there's a Trump way to do that, and it's signing a contract. And we will say, sign a contract with the United States for security for 10 years, and after 10 years, you can decide what you're going to do, but until then, we've got your back and nothing will happen. Don't worry about it, bro.
Yeah.
That solves it. It's just, is there going to be war with Russia in the next 10 years? No, because we've got a 10-year contract.
But countries that don't sign up, they might not be safe.
They don't get those great economic benefits of alliance.
Maybe Ukraine was kind of the working case, the prototype. See what happens when you don't ally with us?
And
you fall down.
As we look into this world, where, as we've described, it's hyper-colonialist. It's so colonial that we've forgotten what it is, and we don't recognize it anymore. And we have all these people loving Harry Potter, which is the projection of that old colonial world into our world today. It very much is the reflection of what they see in the future, even if it's subconscious. There is a magic world where people who don't play by the rules get to go and do things that are impossible. And they change the social order, and of course, stop the ultimate evil.
Yeah, I can see it now. I think a American security contract. That's already it's already how we do stuff, though, right? Don't we sign leases for bases? We're going to put a base in your country, 30-year contract. Now the Japanese.
If Trump becomes president, these debates, these questions, they're going to become public. They're not really going to become public, right? No, they're not really going to negotiate in the open, but he is going to pretend like they are, and he's going to use his public voice to cause pressure.
Now, what about the opposite? What about a war with Russia? Where is the value in that? Can a Trump or a Hillary use a all-out war to their advantage? I mean, power consolidation, suspending constitutional rights, and essentially ceding the law as something that no longer needs to be valued because war trumps value of our Constitution, of our laws, of our traditions. I mean, we saw that in World War II, and I know it's an extreme example, but a lot of people are hyping that we've now entered World War III. There has been more World War III talk in the past 1 or 2 years than at any other time in our lives. And I don't mean that in the sense that it's going to happen, but it seems to be a really prominent theme. Trump, World War III, Nazis again. It's hyped.
Yeah, I agree.
When this hype really gets going, enough people believe it, there's some real power consolidation and there's some real value extraction there from whoever is able to either orchestrate it or win it.
See, the thing is now, I think we were in a proxy war with Russia in the Middle East already, but then it got weird, right? The Russians stood up and they went to Syria directly and they said, we're not going to do the proxy war anymore and you're going to just have to deal with it. And that is a disrupting move. I mean, honestly, there's always been this question. I was watching this Adam Curtis documentary, and it was talking about Soviet nuclear engineering and about how in America we thought that they were super, super advanced in all these different ways. But then finally, when we kind of found out where they actually were, everyone was really surprised and didn't believe it because we couldn't believe that they were so backwards, that they didn't really have all these bombs and that all these nuclear plants weren't actually working. And so it's a question of that, right? Do the Russians actually have the ability to do it? Like, could the Russians, if the United States just went to sleep, if we had a non-aggression pact, could the Russians take over Europe right now? Because we at least spread the projection that in 1948 they could. And so could they now, assuming that Putin could pay and feed everybody, I mean, do they have the military hardware and power to do that? I don't know. I'm not even sure that they had the power to go to Syria. It sounds like that was a really big deployment to them and really expensive, and it's caused all these problems. So I don't know if that's true. And then there's the kind of mutually assured destruction. If we attack Russia, will they really nuke us? And, if they will, do they actually have enough firepower to stop us? And that, I think, is another good question. I don't know if that's true. But what I'll say is, I think that if it is true, then they will. I don't think that there is a tolerance in Russia for invasion at this point. That's the number one thing that they have proven. They lost one war, but they certainly won the second war, and that has caused this vision to them. They just lost another war, so to speak. The Soviet Union fell apart, and now there is this great patriotic revival, right? This 100-year cycle where we feel like we've lost another one. So we need to come back strong and take over Europe, or whatever it's going to be for them. I don't think that there will be this. I don't think there will be a tolerance for a lot of intervention, and I think they are crazy. So, I don't know. I think it's much more likely that you'll see a nuclear war between Israel and Russia. Let me put it that way.
Well, I was going to say, the way you speak about Russia always reminds me of Israel. Now, Israel hasn't yet.
They are
invaded.
Israel. They're just bigger.
They're much bigger. And Israel's policy is never again. And that never again is actually a referral to Masada with the Roman conquest of Israel.
Right.
Oh, we're talking 2,000 years ago. And that moment is still something that's brought up as a major loss, and that suicide is a better answer than slavery. Now,
Right.
I will say, it's a bold move, and they have nukes, and they will take suicide over slavery. And I can agree with that. I understand that mentality. I would rather die than be your slave. I think a lot of revolutionary groups or just radical groups like that is what they believe. And in many ways, Israel, for what they are a very radical nation. They've not yet lost a war, but it is not a guarantee that they will win every war.
Well, in Russia, too, you have a not exactly as extreme, but it is a similar situation where they went through this cycle where the oligarchs took over, representing this Western idea of how things should run, and then the whole country fell apart, and everything turned to lawless chaos, supposedly. And so then you had people who came and they said, oh, we're going to actually put in some order here. We're going to actually fix some of these problems. Stronger, I'm sure, but we're going to fix them. And that didn't represent Western democracy. That represented their own Eastern, if you want to call it, ideals, a return to that. And so now I think they do have this idea of never again are we going to let the oligarchs take over our country. Instead, we will nationalize anybody that isn't playing the game.
It's still the line between state-run in entities that then become oligarchies, though. You look at...
Well, they have a different... The thing is, it's not actually true that they got rid of all the oligarchs, right? What actually happened was they created a new sphere of influence around the government. They replaced all the old people and brought in people with different perspectives. And those new people, if they all are oligarchs, they're not like the old ones. They don't challenge the government anymore, and they're not selling off things quite as cheap anymore either. And so it's an oligarch that plays the game and is part of the plan, whereas the other oligarchs were not part of the plan. And that's the big thing, right? That's what the Soviet idea was. The plan is everything. And this is a return to, we will have a plan. And if you are not part of the plan, this Eastern governmental plan, then you do not have a part here.
Now, do you think the sending troops to Syria is the biggest engagement? Is it a bigger engagement than what Crimea and Ukraine is?
Yeah,
Probably.
definitely. It's not only
So
farther away, but it's logistically more difficult.
I look at it as three. There have been three major exterior Russian conflicts or interventions. There was first the Georgian War, which we're aware they didn't start, but that was
Or
pretty.
did they?
Well, at this point, it doesn't matter. The scale was medium. They sent in a lot of troops. They
Right.
overpowered.
That was
They took-
the beginning. That was not the first war. That was, I think, the Celebration War. I'll put it that way. The first war was Caucasus, yes, but it was on the other side. It was
Yes.
things like Chechnya,
You're
Dagestan, and so they fought two horrible wars there, and finally won the second one. And then they had a lot of troops down there, and they had a lot of political ties based on all this stuff that they've been doing, and they got sucked into Georgia.
So the first one is Crimea 1 and 2. We have Georgia is the third Celebration War, or the we have surplus soldiers and supplies.
Right. And
Let's put it to use.
We've had them tied into this system, and now we have to do these things to back up what we've said in the region already.
Now the Crimean Wars are actually pre-Putin. We can't even put those totally. At least
Chechen
he was
Wars.
not the Chechen Wars. Sorry,
Right.
the Chechen
The first
Wars.
Chechen War is most certainly way pre-Putin. But I will say, Putin has been in the government since during this
80s.
whole time.
At least he was there in East Germany, right?
Yes.
Some of his assignments with I think the KGB were actually in Germany. He had a lot of experience in Germany and St. Petersburg.
He was a big part of the Yeltsin administration.
He was part of the new wave of Russian leadership,
Right.
as well as he has some intelligence military background. We have the South Ossetian War, the war in Georgia. That was a success for Russia, sort of. Very small though, right? We're talking thousands of people there. Micro
Yeah, but
country.
it probably stopped from the Russian perspective. I mean, if what was going on was a revolution, right? That was not under the auspices of Russian control. Where the Russians have said, in the Caucasus, we have a status quo. If you are here and you're on this side of the border, you are Russia. If you are on that side of the border, you are Georgia, and we are the ones that have the final say. There is no other state here. There is no one that's allowed to make a new state here. And so the only way that they could then go and say, oh, well, the Georgians are allowed to make a new state and not have the Chechens and the Dagestan and all these other places then immediately start back up, I think they have to step in. They say, look, it is a revolution, but it's our revolution. And we're still in control, and everything is still according to us. And you can't actually do anything, because if you do anything in Russia, we'll just turn this army right around and march into you. And it doesn't matter what's going on, as long as we control it, it's fine. That's the same in Crimea, right? I don't think Crimea would have actually stayed a part of Ukraine anyway. Like, there's so much stuff going on in Ukraine that does not affect Crimea, on a day-to-day, yet affects them on a macro level a lot, right? Crimea has this great tourist industry, and it has all these, kind of weird agricultural products, and it's really kind of separate from Ukraine landmass anyways, yet all this war and fighting in Ukraine is destroying that industry. So of course we got to get out so that we can continue making money. And it just so happens that the Russians already had this huge vested interest, and were willing to step in and say, oh, this revolution as well is perfectly fine, and we're in control of it. That's how the Russians see themselves, though, is that the people that are in the Russian Federation, that they are independent republics. And
But Crimea, let me say that Crimea has a long Russian goal of having a southern port for 200 years, right? I don't know, maybe being hyperbolic,
they already had the port, though. I mean,
I know they had the port.
It was already theirs.
This is them consolidating it. Right?
This is the area around the port wanting to exploit the fact that the port is there to get a level of independence that they don't have within the Ukrainian system.
Well, certainly Ukraine as a whole has done worse. This war, this conflict, the divisions, the economic stagnation, the gas issues. Ukraine has been declining. People are leaving if they can.
The Russian system as a whole is still very much a product of the Imperial Russian and then Soviet system, where each of the little areas, when the Soviet Union broke up, it was these different Soviet republics that broke away, but not all of them broke away. Some of those republics are still a part of what is now the Russian Federation. But there's still lots of little autonomous republics, as they call them, in different oblasts, and they have different laws, and different ethnic groups get to make different decisions and have different rights in certain republics and oblasts. And so they have this very imperial type system where you actually can, if you're not revolting, right? Places like Chechnya have no political power, no political internal process because the Russians don't trust them. But if you are out in Siberia, you have and you're not revolting, you have a lot of freedom. And so they go to the Crimeans and they say, look, you play by our rules, you don't mess with our port, and you don't get involved with this Ukrainian stuff more than what we tell you, then sure, we will protect you, and you can become part of Russia, and you can be your own little independent oblast. They're governed completely separately. They're really, at this point, Russian only in name and, in force.
Okay.
They're even a special, Putin was the one that introduced the idea of the federal district, where they group together big groupings of states, and then the federal government deals with them on that level. And Crimea, even though it's one of the smallest ones, has its own federal district. That's how separate it is. And I think that was the deal, was they came to the Russians and said, we don't want to be part of Ukraine anymore. And the Russians said, great, we don't want you to be part of Ukraine either. We've got a much better deal for you. You can stay with Ukraine for that, or you can come over here. We'll make you a special federal district. You can keep your laws, but you will help us cement our position here. And as you said, they have lots of different reasons for wanting to do that.
That they do. And now that they've gotten past Crimea, 2 million people, small region, mostly a swamp peninsula, we're not talking about a crazy region. It's not like taking over Afghanistan. It's an easy enough place to control. They have military bases. They've moved on to Syria. Now, with Syria, they also have a port. As we've heard the reports, the Russians are sending an aircraft carrier through the Mediterranean. We know that Russian arms are being used in this conflict. Now, Russia might have overextended themselves, air campaigns and, a bunch of probably some advisors on the ground. That's my speculation, but there are probably Russian advisors on the ground giving advice. There have been meetings between the Russian military commanders and the Syrian army commanders. At what point, though, does Russia formally just take over Syria? When does Syria become part of Russia? Can that happen?
That won't happen, because it's the same system where in the media here, they didn't really report on it, but they've been in Syria for decades, right? The Russians have been in Syria doing the same thing that we do in our client states in Syria, helping the Syrians maintain control. And so it's really more we have entered in. And so I think the Russians then, just like in Georgia, had to call the bluff, where they said, you know what, we are the only ones that get to decide who rules within our sphere of influence. And you want to send in troops? We will send an entire air detachment over there. The Georgians, they don't get to decide. The Chechens, they don't get to decide. The Crimeans, they don't get to decide. The Syrians, they don't get to decide. We are the ones that decide, and no one else can come in and tell us otherwise. We will protect our imperial dominance no matter what.
So, let's see. We're going to have a nuke war between Israel and Russia? Is that the next plan?
Well, I don't think that that's in the triggers right now, in the crosshairs, but I think that's way more likely than the United States.
Israel is literally touching Syria, so way closer to the conflict. I do have to say, very few ISIS attacks in Israel. Maybe that's because we're running a lot more of the terrorist operations in the Middle East than we admit to, but I do find that quite weird, I have to say.
Well, the bacon that I see is actually more that there could be a social revolution in Israel, because it seems like the time is ripe for it. And what if you had, say, northern Israel want to break off and become its own separate state, and they gain Russian endorsement, and the Russians, of course, are the only people that get to decide, and so they decide to step in. And then because we have all these other complicated problems, which would certainly allow us to fund them, but maybe not actually directly intervene there, and that could get out of control. Because, as you said, never again, I can see the Israelis launching a preemptive nuclear strike.
Wow, that would be what a one for the books that are left not burning. It would be crazy. I've never quite thought of that scenario, only because I think actually Russia and Israel are allies, even if it's implicit allies.
Well, I could see just another group gaining control and deciding that they're not going to do it that way anymore. And if the Russians really are serious about everybody in our sphere of influence works by our rules, then that is inevitable.
This is the end of part 1. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to listen to more, visit disassembledpodcast.com. You can also find us on iTunes, where you can give us a 5-star rating if you also enjoyed this episode. We're also on Google Play and Stitcher. If you'd like to give us any feedback, email us at disassembledmedia@gmail.com. Thanks again, and don't forget, listen to part 2.